Hello and welcome back to the Nasty Metal production channel here at YouTube, and welcome to another album of the week. This, of course, is episode number 80. Wow, 80 episodes in. So what is a better album to choose to be the 80th album of the week episode? What is? But for you, who's obviously are being asked this question, you are, of course, are also looking at the title of the video and are looking at the artwork. You obviously are going to be saying, no, I don't think there isn't any better album to be picked as, of course, the 80th episode. There really isn't, because I am looking at the best album to be the 80th episode of Album of the Week. That's, of course, we are talking about none other than Painkiller. Fucking Painkiller. The monumental 12th studio album from, of course, British metal legends Judas Priest. You know, this year I already talked about another monumental album within Judas Priest's career. That was, of course, was British Steel. And of course, when coming up with the lists of some of the, some of the best-selling Judas Priest records, Painkiller would be in that same list as British Steel. I mean, if you are going to list some of the best-selling records for this band, Painkiller is in here. This album did wonders for the band. It basically pretty much re-sparked the band. But how did we get to Painkiller? Well, it actually begins with, of course, none other than 1986 Turbo. I mean, prior to Turbo, after, having a pretty good beginning year in the 70s, they of course hit their hit gold, at least from as far as speaking of gold, that definitely brought them into the light, as of course was none other than British Steel in 1980. That album definitely pretty much soared the band into the charts and began to make them even more of a bigger name and even a household name as well. They really were starting to really get their due with British Steel. And of course, there is that little fucking speckle that is Point of Entry, which definitely threw the fans off for a bit. But after that, they, of course, made up with, of course, with the follow-up two albums being Screaming for Vengeance and Defenders of the Faith. I mean, with Screaming for Vengeance, my God, that even hit the band a little bit even higher with, of course, with none other than a monumental hit such as You've Got Another Thing Coming, for example. And of course, even songs such as Electric Eye and even Bloodstone, as well as even the title track off the album Devil's Child. I mean, you had some classic tracks that definitely were considered classics by many, many longtime fans. And of course, then after that, Defenders of the Faith, we, of course, Free Will Burning, The Sentinel. There's just many other classic songs and stuff even on that record. So basically, you had two back-to-back records, which in many ways go hand in hand. With Defenders of the Faith, it basically made people, most fans think this band is unstoppable. These guys are obviously a force to be reckoned with. There's nothing that can hold this band back. They pretty much were seen as immortal. That's, of course, until 1986 came around, and Turbo was released. Now, me growing up, I of course played the shit out of Turbo. I mean, finding that cassette, of course, in my one of my dad's boxes, I played that cassette over and over, and I played it even being driven to school. I'd play that cassette a lot. Of course, years later, I'd go back whenever I listen to it. All I hear is one fucking cheesy record, and that's what many people thought at that time. They were like, what the fuck is this? This is so goddamn cheesy. Is this even the same fucking band that gave us Screaming for Vengeance, Defenders of the Faith, and even, of course, British Steel? And of course, if you go back in the 1970s, and especially the fans that really pretty much that stuck around with the band even beginning in the 1970s, and of course with bands such as Sad Wings of Destiny, Sin After Sin, and Stained Class, and of course Killing Machine, is this even the same fucking band? It really was. It almost sounded like at times a totally different band, even if there are a few decent tracks on Turbo. Still, it just wasn't the same band. And many people really began to question whether or not Judas Priest are, if they're done. Many people are really questioning the decisions of the band. And of course then 1988 comes around and we get Ram It Down. And at that point, of course, I don't mind Ram It Down, but when the worst song on the album is actually a cover track, and I mean Judas Priest, when it comes to covers, they were like the kings when it came to covers. They did some absolute great covers, taking tracks folk tracks such as Diamonds and Rust, and even of course a psychedelic track that is the Green Manalishi, rest in peace, Peter Green. They were able, and they would take these tracks and they turn them into absolute brilliant pieces of art. They were like brilliant pieces of just straight up art. And of course, Green Manalishi was turned into a screaming metal tune. What they were able to really just make something into those tracks, even though they were good to begin with from the original artists. But Judas Priest just had a way of just brilliantly taking them and, my God, do a great overrun. They really did a great makeup work on those two songs. And so with fucking Johnny Be Good, what the fuck? Now, people were out wondering, why the hell did they do this? Why the hell did they cover Johnny Be Good? Well, I'll tell you why. It's because they were approached to contribute a track to the comedy film Johnny Be Good, which of course came out in the same year, I believe, as Ram It Down. And apparently they did. They decided to they decided to contribute to it, and they recorded it. But they apparently, at the time, they thought they liked the track so much that they put it on the fucking record. And so pretty much at that point, many people were then pretty much just blew the band off and pretty much thought that Priest was done. They obviously couldn't do anything more. It's like, that was it. It was pretty much nothing more than a goddamn skeleton to a lot of these fans. I mean, even people were kind of blowing off Iron Maiden as well at this same point. And again, when you have the horde of thrash metal bands and speed metal bands still at the time, that was still becoming more of the rage, and even the more extreme genres were starting to really kind of come in. And definitely people really were just more into that, and Priest was not doing much for them. But then when news again began coming out, of course, with the leaving of Dave Holland on drums, and of course then producer Tom Allom leaving, it's obviously at this point it really began, I think, to hit Priest in many ways that they had to do something. Of course, also during the same time period, the 1990s, they also got hit with that. Were being sued over the whole the attempted suicide as well over the whole controversy of their cover of Better By You, Better Than Me on Stained Class, which obviously there's been a documentary on this track. There's already been, a lot of the footage from that courtroom, of course, is on DVD anyways. I think it's called Dream Deceivers or something. Very interesting. I mean, all this incident took place in Reno, which I'm not too far from anyways. So again, he had been hit with that, and so in many ways they pretty much had to also scramble to at least even find a replacement for the band. And of course they did find a replacement drummer. That of course was none other than former Racer X drummer, and of course also at one point was even had a stint in the obscure glam metal band Hawk. That's Scott Travis. They found him, and of course that came to, of course, the writing process for none other than Painkiller, and of course then back to replace Tom Allom as producer is none other than Chris Sangarides, the late Chris Sangarides, and of course he had done engineering anyways on Sad Wings of Destiny in 1976. And so with that, I guess in many ways the whole point was to basically get the band back to being at one point what they were, but instead feed off the more newer metal genres at the time, and that's what we get with Painkiller. And when this album was released, I think people originally just heard this on radio or even saw the artwork and were taken by surprise. Many people were saying the Priest is back. The Priest are fucking back. Painkiller, since then, since September 3rd, 1990, is now being hailed as one of Judas Priest's greatest albums, even to the extent of even saying this is by far their best record. To even saying that this is their only good record as well. Many people have just hailed this as being the greatest holy achievement in the band's career, to the point to where many people say that it overshadows anything they did before. It's really, in many ways, people just really hold this album in such a high regard. And of course, upon hearing this album, I mean, yes, I can kind of see why many people would think that way. I mean, sure, I actually don't put it above any of the albums that I consider to be classics. Again, from either being Stained Class or Sin After Sin, Screamer for Vengeance, Defenders of the Faith, and of course even Killing Machine and Sad Wings of Destiny. I don't hold this album any higher than those albums, but it's in that fucking list. I mean, let's just run down the track listing for this album. I mean, good God, we got the title track, which kicks this album off in high gear. I mean, Halford just sounds like he's absolutely possessed on this track. He literally sounds like he's pretty much on a mission. What a fucking performance. And this is probably the absolute best performance Rob Halford ever give, at least on this track, is actually in studio, because the kind of, at least to contribute to, of course, Cuddy Malder's some of his comments and his opinions on Leslie, especially some of the live versions, and his opinion of that Halford has never sounded any good on any of the live versions of this track, at least when doing this track live. He's got a point. If anything, this is the best he's ever gotten at sounding is in studio, because live, you can tell he's always struggled with this track because of just how much passion and just as much force he put into this track. He literally put his whole fucking heart into this, just because of this is one insane vocal performance from Halford. He probably might have struggled to try and do this track anyways in the studio, but he somehow, Chris Sangarides, was able to kind of get him to really be able to pull this off. Again, probably with try after try. This is one blistering performance from him, but the track listing goes on. I mean, goddamn, we all then have like Hell Patrol, All Guns Blazing, Leather Rebel, Metal Meltdown, Nightcrawler, Between the Hammer and the Anvil, A Touch of Evil, and of course, the 1-2 track, that being Battle Hymn, and of course One Shot at Glory, because those two tracks have to play all at once, because Battle Hymn is basically like an intro, and One Shot at Glory is basically the actual track. But just looking from that track listing, I mean, this album does scream fucking classic. It is a classic record from beginning to end. And as far as favorites, there really isn't any really highlight for me, because every track on here is fucking fantastic to me. There's plenty of great tracks on here. But as far as personal favorites, I love fucking All Guns Blazing. I love Hell Patrol. I also love Leather Rebel, Metal Meltdown, Nightcrawler, Between the Hammer and the Anvil. I also dig Touch of Evil, which is a great power ballad on this track. Again, probably some of the best ballads, at least Judas Priest has did since the 70s material, probably since like I do dig some of the ballads off of Scream for Vengeance and Defenders of the Faith, but this is probably the closest they got to, of course, something like Beyond the Realms of Death. This is the closest they probably have gotten to, at least, to really achieving such a level of that. Great fucking track, and of course, One Shot at Glory. This is what Judas Priest were good at, was also just coming up with great anthemic metal tracks, stuff that really will just have you sing along at shows. This is that kind of track. One Shot at Glory is pretty much a glorious fucking track, and what a way to end it. This is pretty much, again, prime Judas Priest, classic Priest, since, of course, Screaming for Vengeance and Defenders of the Faith, and even some of the more heavier tracks and the better tracks off of British Steel. This is Priest. So, and of course, Scott Travis really does inject some life back into Judas Priest on here. I mean, Dave Holland was never that terrible of a drummer, but he wasn't also the greatest either. I mean, when you also had the work with drummers such as Simon Phillips and Les Binks, Dave Holland was kind of a bit of a step below. He was kind of a little bit of a kind of a drawback, even though he wasn't too terrible. I mean, he could keep a rhythm, but he just wasn't anywhere near the sound. I mean, of course, when it came to at least the more commercial stuff of Priest, he did work fine. But when you all of a sudden start doing tracks such as Screaming for Vengeance and The Hellion, and of course even Rapid Fire, and just some of these tracks, and Free Will Burning and Jawbreaker, I think in many ways, drummers such as Scott Travis, Simon Phillips, and even Les Binks would have done a much better job, because they would have kicked in those songs into high fucking gear with at least their techniques, which Dave Holland wasn't very good at, even though he wasn't fine in trapeze. But I think in many ways, when it came to Priest, it seemed like he came to have struggled a little bit with some of those songs, but still, he was able to at least kind of pull them off in the best way he probably could. So I'll give him the benefit of that. But Scott Travis is by far a miles ahead better drummer than Dave Holland. He's very much in the same category again as guys like Simon Phillips and Les Binks, as some of Priest's best drummer. And he's really just he's just on fire with this band, just as the rest of the band here. It's like, again, it just sounds like a whole new band. It's like just life has just been sucked back in. It's like they were able to really breathe again. This is basically Priest being Priest, but a little bit newer. But it worked, and it got the fans to kind of believe in Priest again. But that would last not too long, because after this album, eventually Rob Halford would leave, and he would form, of course, bands such as Fight, and of course then Halford. So that left a bit of a gap in Judas Priest, because from 1990 to, of course, 1997, there was a big 6-year gap, basically, within there. And they, of course, had to find at least a new singer, and they found former Brain Aside vocalist Ripper Owens. Fucking Tim Ripper Owens. And of course that came to albums such as Jugulator and 2000's Demolition. Those are usually either regarded as some of the band's finest albums at times, or they are also considered some of the band's worst. And I actually do dig Jugulator, but Demolition I'm not the hugest fan of. And that only comes down to mixing and production and sometimes writing. And they're okay records, but they're not anywhere near the best. But Jugulator, I seem to put a little head above Demolition. But that's all my thoughts, at least, on Jugulator and Demolition. So eventually, though, Tim, I think, would leave the band in 2003. Halford is then back in the band, and that again leads into, of course, 2005's Angel of Retribution. And since Angel of Retribution, this band has definitely have been doing very great for themselves. Until K.K. Downing left in 2011 and then was replaced by Richie Faulkner. And then, of course, we then got 2 more records out of this lineup, being, of course, Redeemer Souls and Firepower. And, of course, there's plans of being a new album as well. And, of course, within the whole pandemic, I don't know if that's been on hold, but I know there still has been some progress, I guess, a little bit on the album. But in many ways, I'm still always looking forward to new Priest, even if it isn't going to anywhere touch any of the classics. Even Firepower, I thought, was a pretty good album, but I don't know if it really anywhere touched any of the classics, even if I thought it was a pretty good album in its own right. So there we go. Painkiller from Judas Priest. I guess at this point, since many people are probably are listening into this and are probably just hearing this, and are just hearing me talk about this, are probably getting inspired to pull this record out just to probably listen to it for old time's sake. I mean, in celebration of its anniversary, I mean, reaching 30 years, you pretty much we're already inspired to pull this album out just to listen to it again. But for those who have never heard Painkiller, which I don't think is impossible, I don't think that's possible. I think that is impossible that anybody would be new to this album, because at this point, anybody has heard Painkiller. But if you haven't, you probably shouldn't even be listening to me talking about it. You should have been going out and finding a copy, or you should have been listening to it on the internet just to fucking listen to it, or find it somewhere to buy online if you can't go to any record store. Oh boy. So yeah. Just a great classic record from Judas Priest. So with that, I hope all enjoyed. This is Every Thrash I Sam out. And I'll see you all later. Take care, everyone.